Hi there, and welcome back to Dreamaro. Tonight we are starting a new journey called Myths and Legends from around the world. We will explore 3 unforgettable stories from different cultures. Beowulf and Grendel from Anglo-Saxon legends, the Great Stone Fire Eater from Korean myths, and the myth of Vukub Cakix from Mayan mythology. If you like these stories, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And if you want, tell us in the comments which myth you are most excited for, or where in the world are you listening from and what time it is for you. Thank you for being here. Now get comfortable, maybe close your eyes, and let us begin. The hall was called Heorot, and in the mouths of men who loved grandeur, it was spoken as if the word itself tasted of honey and iron. It rose from the Danish earth like a promise made in oaken gold. Its roof beams were thick enough to convince a young warrior that the world could be held together by good wood and goodwill. Its benches were long, its hearth fires generous, its doors carved with beasts that looked eternally mid-roar. In the evenings, when the sky turned to bruised violet over the low fields, torches flickered along the approach, and the hall filled with the sound of boots, laughter, cups clinking, and the deep relief of soldiers who had survived another day of weather, war, and duty. This was the kind of place that made a king feel immortal. Hrothgar had built it not only as a house for feasting, but as a center of gravity. To gather men was to gather loyalty. To gather loyalty was to hold a kingdom together when winter pressed in or enemies tested the borders. The mead hall was politics made physical. It was ceremony and strategy, disguised as celebration. The Danes came to Heorot to hear songs of old victories and to measure themselves against them in quiet ways. A man would listen to a story of some long-dead hero, then grip his cup a little tighter, thinking of the next raid, the next oath, the next moment when steel might decide whether he deserved to be remembered. The scops sang, the harps chimed in simple, bright patterns. The words cut through the smoke and settled into the minds of listeners who had been raised on the idea that life was brief and fame was a ladder out of its brevity. The hall was warm, bright, and loud enough to make the world outside seem temporary. It was this sound that drew the monster. At first, no one named him to a child. The mothers who lived near the edges of the king's reach spoke of the night in careful tones, as if the wrong syllables might summon teeth to the doorway. But terror has a way of demanding shape. Soon the men gave the horror a name, then gave the name a story. Grendel, a creature of the marshes and moors, of places where the ground swallowed footsteps and fog rose like breath from a sleeping beast. He was not a wolf and not a man, and the simplest way to speak of him was to call him a misborn thing, a shadow that had learned to walk, a curse given muscle. In the poem that would later carry this tale across centuries, Grendel was described as a descendant of Cain, placed outside human joy by ancient sin. That detail mattered to an age in which old Germanic hero culture was being stitched together with Christian moral framing. The world of Beowulf is a threshold world. It remembers the pagan past and speaks with the newer religious voice. A monster can be an enemy of the tribe, and also a sign of moral exile. The story makes room for both. It gives Grendel a lineage not to explain him away, but to deepen the dread. A creature with no place in God's order becomes a creature with no place in the hall's order either. He needed no invitation. He came at night, when the laughter had climbed into its fullest height, and the last boasts were being made over shared cups. He came when men felt safest and greatest. He came because joy was an insult to him. The hall's music was a light too bright for a creature that belonged to the margins. There is a cruelty in that kind of hatred. It is not the practical cruelty of a rival tribe seeking land or tribute. It is the cruelty of a being that wants to tear down what it cannot touch without pain. The first attack was unbelievable. A guard vanished. Then two. A shepherd found blood on the path that led toward the king's lands. Then a broken spear. Then a trail that ended in reeds and black water. The Danes searched. They found nothing but a sense that the earth had opened and swallowed men whole. In the early days, Hrothgar doubtless told himself that this was but an unlucky season, that perhaps outlaws had grown bold or a rival lord had slipped knives into the dark. A king has to think like that. The alternative is to accept that his power ends where the moon begins. Then the monster came to the hall itself. Grendel crashed through the great door with a force that turned carved wood into splinters. He was huge, broad-shouldered, with arms that seemed too long for any human measure. His eyes were described as burning with a cold kind of malice, a paradox suited to nightmares. He moved like something half familiar and half impossible, the way a storm seems to have intention, even though it is only wind and water. Men who had faced blades without flinching froze at the sight of him. That is the first true privilege of a monster. It does not need to be skilled. It needs only to be wrong enough to disorient the mind. He killed quickly at first, then slowly, savoring the shift from noise to panic. He seized one warrior, crushed him, and devoured him. He took another and broke him, as if breaking a branch to test its dryness. The modern mind can read this as horror, and it is, but it is also something else. It is the mythic representation of a threat that is beyond social rules. In a warrior society where feuds and battles still obey cultures of honor, a devouring monster is a fear that has no negotiation. The hall that had been built to anchor a kingdom became a stage for helplessness. Hrothgar survived that first night, but survival can be a strange burden. The king who prides himself on protection must now look into the faces of widows, brothers, fathers, and sons, and find language that can carry both grief and authority. He had made Heorot a beacon. Now that beacon attracted something that fed on light. The attacks continued. Night after night the beast returned. He learned the rhythms of the hall. He knew when the mead ran thick and the songs grew bold. He knew when the men were slow with drink and confidence. The Danes attempted every defense they could imagine. They laid traps, they posted extra guards. They tried to ambush the monster with coordinated spear thrusts. But Grendel was stronger than their lines and more patient than their fear. When the monster has the advantage of the night and the advantage of terror, tactics crumble. The tale says the attacks lasted 12 years, a span long enough to become a generation of dread. Time in myth has a weight that is rarely only literal. 12 winters means the kingdom had time to change under the pressure of fear. Young men grew up knowing the hall as a place of mourning as much as celebration. Old men who should have died in bed learned instead to sleep with a hand on a weapon in a building, meant for peace. The social center wobbled. The king's authority, though not questioned aloud, was bruised by the knowledge that a creature could violate the heart of his world. The poet gives the grief a purpose. In an oral culture, the retelling of disaster is a way to make it survivable. A community that can shape its fear into narrative, can face the next evening with a little more spine. And so the Danes waited for a name that could change the pattern. Across the sea, the Geats heard of the terror. Geatland lay in what modern readers associate with southern Sweden, a region of shifting alliances, proud households, and families who measured themselves by the strength of their lineage. Beowulf was not a king yet. He was a young warrior with a reputation thick enough to travel before him. The story presents him as a man of exceptional strength, which in heroic culture does not simply mean he is physically imposing, it means he is a vessel for fate. Great strength marks a man as significant in the cosmic economy of reputation. The news reached him through rumor and trade, the way stories do in a world where the sea is both road and barrier. A hall that had been silenced for 12 winters. A king in despair. A monster that no blade had bested. Beowulf listened with the attention of a man who hears destiny calling his name from across a storm. He decided to go. In many heroic tales, this decision is framed as pure altruism. In truth, the story allows for a more layered reading. Beowulf seeks glory. Glory is not a selfish object in that world. It is a social currency that keeps a name alive after death. To win glory by saving a great king is to strengthen both one's own house and the moral order of the world. The culture is honest about this interplay. A hero does good and is remembered for it. The remembrance is part of the good. He chose 14 companions, men who trusted his strength and wanted a share of the fate that seemed to follow him. They prepared a ship, loaded it with weapons, armor, and gifts suitable for a royal audience. The voyage itself is brief in the poem, but heavy with significance. The sea in early medieval imagination is often a boundary between worlds. To cross it is to move from the known into a challenge that will prove worth. When they arrived on Danish shores, the coast guard challenged them, as any wise kingdom would challenge unknown armed men arriving by sea. Beowulf answered with the confidence of a man accustomed to laying his intentions on the table without flinching. He came for Hrothgar. He came to end the terror. The Danes escorted them inland to the hall that had been both jewel and wound. Hrothgar received Beowulf with the hospitality expected of a king who understood alliance. The old bonds between their families mattered. In the world of Beowulf, kinship is not only blood, it is obligation woven over time. The king recognized the young warrior and remembered favors exchanged in the past. He was a wise enough ruler to know that a hero is not only a weapon. He is a symbol that can restore the morale of a people. The hall was lit again for this guest. Yet even celebration had changed. The feast for Beowulf was not the reckless revelry of earlier years. It was cautious hope dressed in ceremony. The Danes watched him the way a drowning man watches a floating plank. They wanted to believe, they did not dare invest too quickly. Unferth spoke. Every heroic court has its skeptic. Unferth, who served in Hrothgar's retinue, could not let a foreign hero stand untested within the hall's hierarchy. His challenge was part jealousy, part social ritual. A man's reputation was a thing that could be examined publicly before it was accepted as truth. The poem uses this moment to show Beowulf's verbal strength. He answers not with apology, but with a recounting of his past feats. He had faced sea monsters. He had survived trials where others would have drowned or fled. The details vary across retellings, but the function is clear. He is a man who does not fold under the gaze of an audience. The court listens. The skepticism fades. Then the queen, Wealdhau, appears with ceremonial grace. The presence of a queen in such scenes is not trivial. She represents continuity, peace-weaving, and the softer power of order. Her offering of the cup is both welcome and recognition. The hall is a system of roles as much as a building of wood. The ceremony reaffirms that Beowulf has been accepted into the social structure of the moment. But the night is still the night. Beowulf, in his boldness, makes a crucial vow. He will fight Grendel without weapons. He mirrors the monster's own brutal simplicity, not out of foolishness, but out of confidence that physical contest will prove the truth of his strength. This choice has a mythic clarity. To defeat a monster that relies on raw force, the hero chooses to meet it in the same arena. It becomes a contest of bodies and wills, stripped of technological advantage. He removes his armor. He sets aside his sword. For modern readers, this can feel like performative bravado. For the culture that produced the poem, it is a statement of honor. It also reflects the truth that in mythical logic, the hero often wins not only because he is stronger, but because he fulfills the story's expectation of courage in its purest form. The Danes withdraw from the hall. This moment is quietly devastating. The warriors of Heorot, the men who had once strutted across these planks as if no darkness could touch them, now leave the hall to a foreign hero and his small band. The shame is not stated, but it sits beneath the scene like a hidden stone. The hall becomes a place of waiting rather than feasting. Beowulf's companions lie down. They know the odds. The poem, in its spare, early medieval way, suggests that some of them believe they will die before morning. But loyalty is a kind of courage too. To stay with a leader on the edge of doom is to bind one's own name to a larger legend. Outside, the night grows deep. Grendel moves through the moors. The landscape around Heorot is not merely backdrop, it carries symbolic charge. The marshes are liminal spaces. They represent the untamed, the pre-social, the places where the rules of the hall do not apply. Monsters often live in such regions because myths externalize fear into geography. The hall is civilization. The fen is its shadow. There is also a historical echo here. Early medieval communities did exist near wetlands that could be dangerous, cold, disease-carrying, and difficult to control. A supernatural predator emerging from such places speaks to anxieties about the vulnerability of settled life. Grendel approaches the hall with the certainty of habit. He has done this too many times to believe he can be surprised. In the distance, the shape of Heorot rises against the night sky, still huge, still proud. The torchlight from within suggests life, and life is what he comes to unmake. The monster does not think in political terms, but his actions have political consequences. Each man he kills is a thread cut from Hrothgar's tapestry of power. As he nears the door, he smells men he does not recognize. This is the first hint of change. Foreign scents in the hall, new voices earlier in the evening. The monster might not understand alliances, but he understands intrusion. His rage sharpens. He lays one heavy hand on the door. Inside, Beowulf is awake. He lies still, studying the dark and listening for the small betrayals of sound that precede violence. The hall is quiet, in a way it has not been quiet for years. It is the quiet of a trap and a prayer at the same time. The Geats breathe slowly. Somewhere a torch sputters. The beams above creak in the winter air. There is a kind of intimacy in the minutes before violence. Beowulf's mind moves through memory, not as a polished speech, but as flashes. The face of his father, the reputation he has carried like a burden and a crown, the knowledge that what happens tonight will become song or silence. He does not fear death, not in the ordinary sense. He fears failing to be what his name has promised. The door gives a low groan. The monster's strength leans into it. The hall seems to hold its breath. Outside, mist curls around Grendel's legs. The stars are cold. The world beneath the sky feels vast and indifferent. But in this one building, in this one night, the contest of monster and man is about to determine whether joy can survive in the heart of a kingdom. The torches burn lower. The men in the hall remain still. Grendel is at the threshold. The great door yielded with a sound like a tree splitting in winter. Grendel stepped into Heorot as if he owned the night. He had come so many times that the hall was familiar to him, a place of easy killing and easier contempt. He knew the smell of wood smoke and stale ale. He knew the way men slept after feasting, heavy with pride and drink. He knew the patterns of guards and the cheap bravery that dissolved when shadow and brute strength collided. This hall had been his hunting ground for 12 long winters, and the memory of those nights lived in him like a rhythm. Tonight, the rhythm changed. The monster paused, head angled, listening. The noises of celebration were gone. The hall was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Silence can be a warning, but Grendel had never learned to respect warnings from men. He had learned to respect only force. The stillness simply promised prey that could not run fast enough. He moved forward. The torchlight painted the edges of his body in wavering gold, and for a heartbeat he looked almost like a grotesque statue from some older age of giants. His arms hung long and powerful. His hands were built for tearing. His chest rose and fell with a low, hungry breath. The poet would later place him among the damned, a creature with no place in happiness, and that exile would become part of his monstrous aura. Whether that idea was born from older pagan fears or the newer Christian moral lens, it fit the terror he inspired. A being cut off from joy will always try to destroy the joy of others. Grendel crossed the floor. A Geat lay near the center, asleep in his borrowed courage, unaware that he was about to be a name in someone else's tragedy. The monster seized him without effort. Bone cracked. The sound was short and awful. Grendel fed as a wolf feeds, quick and certain, as if this was merely the opening taste of a meal he had earned. Then he reached for another. His hand closed around a forearm that did not yield. Beowulf rose from the shadows like a storm that had been waiting behind a mountain. The hero's grip locked onto Grendel's wrist with terrific simplicity. There was no flourish, no shouted challenge, no invocation of fate spoken aloud. The moment did not need words. The force of it was its own language. Grendel jerked back in surprise, and surprised monsters are dangerous in the way wounded predators are dangerous. His eyes widened, and the hall seemed to narrow around them, as if all the old wood understood that this was the night its story would change. Beowulf did not release him. The Geat was broad-shouldered, thick with strength, but his power was not only muscle. The heroic world that shaped him believed that a man could be chosen by destiny and made larger than the sum of his limbs. Beowulf carried that belief the way a sword carries an edge. He had come across the sea for this moment, to restore a king's honor and to carve his own name into the memory of men who measured time by song. Grendel tried to wrench free. He had never met a man whose body could answer him with equal force. He had never needed to test this particular boundary. Now he found it, and the boundary held. The monster lunged sideways, dragging Beowulf across the rush-strewn floor. Benches scraped and toppled. The remaining Geats surged awake and reached for weapons, but their leader's vow held them back. This was his fight. The oath of a hero in this world was not a casual thing. A boast spoken in the hall was a rope tied around the soul. To break it was to unravel the honor that kept a warrior's name alive beyond death. Beowulf planted his feet and braced. The wood beneath him groaned. Grendel swung his free arm in a savage arc, trying to smash the hero's head against the hall's pillars. Beowulf ducked and drove forward, shoulder into the monster's chest. The two forces collided with such violence that the great hall seemed almost fragile in comparison. The roof beams trembled, torches sputtered. The shadows of both fighters threw monstrous shapes against the walls. This was a fight older than any one culture. In its bones it echoed the universal pattern of the champion facing the devourer of order. The mead hall was the heart of society, a place where oaths and gift-giving bound people into something bigger than isolated families. In the early Germanic world, loyalty to a lord was not abstract ideology. It was a survival system. A king like Hrothgar gave rings, armor, land, and standing. In return, men gave service, protection, and blood. A monster that could kill those men in their own sanctuary threatened the entire logic of the social world. Grendel was not simply a beast. He was a rupture. Beowulf understood that instinctively, even if he would never phrase it in those terms. His body answered the threat in the most direct way possible. The fight surged toward the door. Grendel's claws scraped at Beowulf's forearm. He tried to bite, to tear with teeth aimed at the throat. Beowulf twisted, forced the monster's arm into a painful angle. The demon howled. The sound was not the roar of an animal. It was something raw. It carried rage, shock, and a new flavor Grendel had not tasted in himself before. Fear. The Geats, watching from the edges, felt it too. This was the turning point of years. Every Dane who had spilt blood in this hall without being able to stop the terror would have understood the significance of that sound if they had been present. But the Danes had withdrawn, leaving the foreign hero to bear the weight of their hope. The hall was now a closed arena where only fate and force could speak. Beowulf drove Grendel backward. The monster's heels struck a bench. He stumbled. Beowulf tightened his grip. The hero's hands were like iron bands, and the story would later claim he had the strength of 30 men. Such numbers are mythic shorthand, a way to signal the scale of a hero's capacity. The poet was not interested in a measured count. He was interested in the feeling of impossible power made visible. Grendel thrashed. He smashed a pillar. Wood splintered. The sound of it was like a thunderclap. The old hall, built to outlast storms and time, now suffered under the force of a fight that belonged to the realm of legend. Outside, the night remained indifferent. Inside, the world narrowed to two bodies, locked in a contest of domination. Beowulf did not seek a clean kill. He sought a decisive victory. There is a difference. A clean kill ends a threat. A decisive victory ends a story in a way that can be remembered. Grendel tried to retreat. He had never fled Heorot in weakness. He had left with the casual satisfaction of a predator. Now he wanted only distance and darkness, the refuge of the marsh where the rules of men could not follow him. Beowulf forced him to stay. They pivoted across the hall again, slipping on blood and crushed rushes. The air smelled of sweat, smoke, and something older, as if the monster brought with him the sour breath of the bog itself. The hero could feel the creature's strength surging in desperate bursts. But desperation is not always enough against a man whose body seems to have been forged for this particular moment. Beowulf twisted his hips and pulled. The movement was simple and terrible. There was a crack, like a branch torn from a living tree. Grendel's arm came away at the shoulder. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The monster stared at the ruin of himself, stunned by the sudden emptiness where power had been. Blood poured out in dark sheets. His howl became a scream that shook the rafters and made the Geats flinch despite their excitement. This was not the cry of a creature that might recover. This was the cry of inevitable death. Grendel stumbled backward. Beowulf held the torn arm aloft, the enormous limb still twitching with the broken force of its owner. The sight was so shocking that it crossed into the realm of symbol. This was the physical proof that the monster who had made the Danes helpless was not invincible. Grendel fled. He smashed through the doorframe with his remaining strength and vanished into the night, leaving a smear of blood along the threshold as if the hall itself had wounded him. The Geats did not chase. The victory was clear enough. To pursue a dying monster into the bog would be to risk turning triumph into foolish loss. The heroic mind prized courage, but it also respected the wisdom of timing. Beowulf had promised to end the terror. The evidence in his hands was more final than any hunt. The silence that followed was strange. It was the calm after a storm that no one believed they could survive. Beowulf stood in the ruined hall with Grendel's arm in his grip, chest heaving, listening to the slow return of ordinary sounds. The crackle of a torch, the low moan of wood settling, the breath of his men. Then dawn began to change the world. News spreads faster than reason. By morning, the Danes approached Heorot with a cautious crowd energy, like villagers nearing the site of a lightning strike. They expected to find corpses. They expected to find the Geats dead and the monster gone. They found instead a blood-soaked floor, shattered benches, and the impossible trophy of a monster's severed arm. Hrothgar arrived soon after. The old king's face carried the exhaustion of years spent helpless. A ruler can endure defeat in battle more easily than helplessness in his own sanctuary. The monster had not merely killed men. He had embarrassed the logic of kingship. Now that logic was restored. The hall filled again. This time the noise was joy laced with disbelief. Warriors who had survived previous killings touched the walls as if they needed physical proof that the hall remained real. Mothers and wives received word that the terror was ended, and relief fell through the kingdom like warm rain after drought. Beowulf was honored. Hrothgar, as ringgiver and lord, did what his role demanded. He praised Beowulf for courage, strength, and the integrity of his vow. The king's generosity was not an indulgence. It was a public reaffirmation of the social order. Gifts were part of governance. To reward a hero was to show that bravery was recognized by power, and that service to the community led to status and wealth. Gold moved from the king's hands to Beowulf's. Armor, rings, and weapons were offered. The gestures mattered as much as the objects. In the heroic world, a gift was a story that said both giver and receiver understood their place in the web of obligation. It bound Beowulf to Hrothgar in honor, even though he was a foreign prince. The Scops sang again. They took the raw events of the night and shaped them into poetry. This is one of the quiet engines of survival in early societies. A terrifying moment becomes a story with rhythm and meaning. The song preserves facts in an age without written records for most people. It also adds a layer of mythic polish that ensures the tale will not die with the witnesses. The Beowulf poem itself would eventually be preserved by scribes in a single surviving manuscript centuries later, carrying traces of a much older oral tradition. That distance between event and preservation is part of the magic. The story passed through countless voices before ink caught it. Each voice likely adjusted a detail, emphasized a theme, trimmed a line to fit the cadence of memory. Yet the core remained. A monster, a hall, a hero who refused to yield. For a while, the hall belonged to joy again. Men feasted with an appetite that had been starved by fear. They drank to Beowulf, to Hrothgar, to the future. The atmosphere of Heorot changed in an almost physical way. Spaces remember. A hall that has heard screams will always carry a shadow of them. But a hall that experiences deliverance gains a new layer of meaning. The boards where Grendel had spilled blood now held the weight of celebration. Beowulf watched the Danes with a calm satisfaction. He was a young man in a world where youth and strength were prized. He had achieved a decisive victory in a foreign land. That kind of triumph is a ladder that leads upward and outward. Warriors would speak of this night when they judged his worth in years to come. But the story was not finished. The night had carved a wound in the world of monsters too. Grendel's death would not occur in isolation. The relationships of the monstrous realm mirror human relationships in twisted ways. A mother, even a monstrous one, does not always accept the death of her child without consequence. Whispers moved among the Danes. They spoke of Grendel's mother, a figure of the swamp, deeper and older than her son. The poem would later describe her as a terrifying female avenger, a being who lived beneath dark water in a hall of her own. The details matter because they reflect cultural anxieties about vengeance and the way violence propagates through kinship. In early feud cultures, to kill a man was to invite the response of his family. The monstrous version of that law gave the story a second rising tension. Hrothgar likely understood this danger. No king survives long without grasping the politics of retaliation. The celebratory mood of the day did not erase the reality that Grendel's blood had been spilled. If monsters had their own twisted kinship, the price might yet be demanded. Even so, the day belonged to relief. As the sun lowered over the meadows and the sea wind carried the smell of salt into the settlement, Heorot warmed in the glow of restored purpose. The Danes walked through the hall again with the casual confidence of men who can imagine tomorrow without dread. Beowulf accepted his honored place among them. He listened to the songs that now included his name. He saw the way young warriors studied him, measuring what heroism might require of them one day. He observed Wealhtheow's steady presence beside the king, the quiet power of a queen whose role was to keep peace within a fragile web of loyalties. The evening settled. Torches were relit. The roof beams that had shaken under the monster's fury now held steady above the renewed bustle of a hall reclaimed from nightmare. Outside, the sky deepened into darkness again, but the darkness no longer seemed to own the world. In the distance, far beyond the warm light of human celebration, the marshes waited, and the water kept its secrets. Long before Seoul was a city of endless streets and bright night windows, when its palaces were still new in the imagination of kings and the hills around it felt closer to the bones of the world, the people believed that the landscape listened. Mountains were not silent piles of rock. Rivers were not simple water. Wind had moods, fire had will. A city could be blessed by its placement or doomed by it, depending on how wisely humans read the shape of the land. The old logic of the peninsula carried a deep respect for forces that could not be ruled by decree. Even in eras of strong dynasties and proud courts, there was always an uneasy knowledge that a crown was lighter than a storm. Southwest of the capital, a mountain sat like a watchful shoulder against the horizon. The air there was different, warmer in subtle ways, even when the world was cold. The earth sometimes exhaled a faint breath that smelled of minerals and smoke. Shepherds who grazed goats near its foothills returned home with nervous eyes. Hunters avoided the upper ridges at dusk. Children were told to stay away not because a parent wanted to terrify them, but because every generation had inherited the same caution. Inside that mountain lived the fire spirit. The stories described him with a kind of half-comic, half-dreadful clarity that folklore loves. He was not a noble flame god bearing wisdom. He was appetite. He was temper. He was the hunger of a forge that never cooled. Some said he was small in stature, an imp of heat with a grin too wide. Others imagined him as a vast being whose body was a moving blaze that could stand as tall as trees when he wished. These contradictions did not weaken the tale. They made him more frightening. A creature without fixed form is a creature whose boundaries the human mind cannot measure. He ate what fire eats. Dry woods and brush disappeared in his wake. Forgotten huts in the lonely stretches of countryside smoldered down to ash if his mood turned cruel. He swallowed the resinous heart of pine forests, as though they were snacks stolen from a sleeping world. On days when his craving sharpened, he chewed stones themselves, leaving blackened scars and strange glassy patches where heat had transformed the surface of the mountain. There were seasons when he slept. The mountain seemed quiet then. The people of the capital would look southwest and see only the ordinary shape of a distant peak. But the old farmers knew that silence in a volcano is not always peace. It can be patience. One summer, the capital's palace gleamed with confidence. A king had built new structures, carved beams, fresh roofs, painted corridors. and ceremonial gates, shaped to convince both visitors and spirits that the throne was strong. The palace was more than luxury. It was message. It told rival elites, foreign envoys, and the common subject alike that order had a physical home. The court rituals performed within those walls were designed to align the human realm with the cosmic one, to present the monarch as a harmonizing axis between heaven and earth. That idea has deep roots in East Asian statecraft. The moral authority of a ruler was tied to harmony with the world. When calamity struck, people sometimes wondered if a ruler's virtue had faltered. That was not always a fair judgment, but it was a powerful one. A palace was a declaration that the king intended to keep the world properly arranged. The fire spirit saw that palace and felt insulted. From his mountain he could sense the heavy smell of fresh timber, the sweet weakness of new lacquer, the pleasing dryness of unused beams. The palace was a feast so tempting that it became a kind of obsession. He imagined swallowing a throne room as though it were a bundle of kindling. He imagined the royal banners curling in flame. He imagined the shock on the faces of humans who believed that wealth could shield them from old elemental hungers. He did not go alone into this dream. The south wind was his companion in mischief. Wind spirits often appear in Korean stories as forces with personality, playful or dangerous depending on the moment. The south wind in this tale is a conspirator who understands that fire is never more powerful than when it is fed by breath. When the fire spirit called to her, she answered with laughter that sounded like leaves whipped into frantic applause. They planned with a patient spite of beings who could outlast human lifetimes. The fire spirit waited for a night when the air was dry and the sky held no promise of rain. He waited for the kind of darkness that makes a city feel small against the vast shoulders of the land. Then he climbed out of the mountain. The first steps of a fire demon toward a city do not look like the march of an army. There are no banners, no drums, no scouts. There is only the shifting glow of unnatural heat, the smell of warm stone, the faint tremor of animals that sense danger before humans can name it. The south wind raced ahead of him, slipping through the city streets with sudden gusts that rattled shutters and made stray dogs whine. The outer houses caught first. A spark that should have died on a roof beam instead bloomed into a hungry tongue of flame. One small blaze became two became 10. The wind fanned the fire as though it were playing a cruel instrument. Streets that had been quiet turned into corridors of panic. People ran with bundles in their arms, with children clamped to their chests, with prayers stuck in their throats. The fires climbed. They leapt across narrow lanes and devoured the dry backs of wooden buildings. In an age when cities were largely built from timber, and roofs were often thatched or layered with materials that could burn, a strong wind could turn a small mistake into devastation. The tale exaggerates the agency of the fire spirit, but it also reflects a historical truth. Urban fires were feared with reason. The fire spirit reached the palace. He was delighted. He stormed through the outer gates of the compound, a living furnace with laughter that could have been mistaken for the crackling of beams under torture. Roof tiles exploded in heat. Pillars blackened, then collapsed. The beauty of the palace was helpless against the raw logic of combustion. The king's guards did what men always do when facing something beyond training. They fought in pieces. They pushed back flames with wet cloth and desperate courage. They formed lines that disintegrated under a force that did not care about ranks. By dawn, the palace was ash. The fire spirit returned to his mountain, with the satisfied mood of a creature who had proven a point. The south wind left the city in a swirl of soot and playful contempt. The capital woke to ruin, and the king stood among the smoking remnants of his authority. A monarch can mourn in private. A monarch must respond in public. The court assembled. Advisors arrived with ink-stained hands and sleepless faces. Geomancers were summoned. The wise men of the realm were asked to explain how the city had been pierced so easily by elemental rage. The first impulse in such moments is to seek blame. Some looked to the mountain and whispered of negligence, of rituals perhaps skipped or performed without the proper reverence. Others argued that this was an unavoidable trial of the age. Folklore is not always concerned with fairness, it is concerned with meaning. The king in this story is neither villain nor fool. He is a ruler faced with a threat that mocks human confidence. He chooses action. The idea of bringing in a Chinese dragon comes from an older cultural ecology where dragons are not monsters but cosmic regulators associated with rain, clouds, rivers, and the balance of forces that keep agriculture alive. In many East Asian traditions, dragons are beneficent and powerful. They live in the spaces of sky and water. They can punish arrogance, but they can also protect a righteous realm. In a city threatened by fire, a rain dragon feels like the most sensible ally imaginable. A messenger was sent. The kingdom bore great expense to secure such a guardian. The dragon that arrived was magnificent, scaled and ancient, with the aura of something that belonged to river depths and thunderheads. The people welcomed it like a piece of heaven that had decided to walk among them. The court fed it lavishly. It was honored, adorned, and treated with almost comical indulgence, as though comfort could ensure loyalty. That indulgence did not bring vigilance. The dragon, in this version of the story, grows complacent. Perhaps it is offended by the way humans presume to command a being of cosmic stature. Perhaps it is simply lazy. Folktales often punish complacency regardless of the creature that displays it. The moral is not subtle. An imported solution, however impressive, cannot replace local wisdom and sustained vigilance. The fire spirit returned. The south wind joined him again with delighted malice. The dragon slept. The palace burned a second time. This second devastation cuts deeper than the first. The king has tried the grand solution, the exotic power, the dramatic gesture meant to reassure the people that the throne can summon the forces of the world itself. And still the flames win. The shame of that failure would have felt heavy in a culture where rulers were expected to align themselves with cosmic order. The dragon departs. The people are left with the truth that no foreign wonder will save them if they do not understand the specific shape of their own danger. The king gathers his advisors again. In the smoke of the second disaster, a more grounded intelligence emerges. They begin to map the pattern of the fire spirit's approach. They think in terms of geography rather than spectacle. The fire spirit comes from the southwest. He travels through a valley that channels his path toward the city. If the path can be disrupted, the force can be slowed. A plan is formed. It is simple enough to seem almost naive. Dig a great pond across the valley. Fill it with water deep enough to swallow a fire demon's stride. Let the spirit of water oppose the spirit of flame. In folklore, this is pleasing logic. In practical terms, it is also an echo of the real ways pre-modern societies used water systems, moats, reservoirs, and landscape engineering to mitigate disasters. Human beings have always shaped their environment to withstand threats. Tales like this turn that pragmatic truth into mythic drama. The order goes out. Laborers arrive from every district. The digging begins. The ground is cut open under a punishing Sunday. Men haul earth in baskets. Women bring water and food. The capital becomes a place of construction that feels almost like war preparation. The king is not portrayed as a distant figure. He is a commander in a struggle against a force that has embarrassed his throne twice over. The pond grows. The water is diverted. The valley now holds a shimmering barrier, a silent ambush designed to humble flame. The fire spirit does not know. In the mountain, he is already plotting his next feast. The south wind boasts of how quickly the palace will fall this time. The fire spirit imagines the sound of new beams cracking and the rich smell of lacquer giving way to smoke. He descends again. The city waits. The pond lies in darkness like a secret held between the king and the earth. This chapter ends on the knife edge of that anticipation, with a capital that has suffered enough to learn the value of quiet preparation, with a fire spirit whose arrogance has not yet met its counterweight, and with the south wind still eager to play the cruel musician of disaster. Night returns to Seoul. The rebuilt palace stands with cautious dignity, its rooflines cutting clean shapes against the sky. Guards walk their routes with eyes sharpened by memory. The people sleep lightly. Somewhere beyond the city's edge, the new pond reflects starlight and keeps its trap patient. The mountain glows faintly in the southwest. The wind shifts. The fire spirit begins to move. The fire spirit came down the mountain again with the swagger of a creature that had never paid a lasting price for arrogance. The south wind ran ahead of him, teasing the trees into frantic motion, lifting ash that still lingered in the cracks of the city's memory. Seoul had rebuilt quickly because humans always rebuild quickly when they have no other choice. New beams had been raised, new tiles set, new paints brushed onto palace wood with hands that still trembled when old men recalled the first two burnings. The king had ordered resilience to be visible. The people had answered with tired bravery. The palace looked whole enough to convince a stranger, but to those who had watched it collapse in flame, the structures had the uneasy fragility of a healed bone that still remembers its fracture. The valley welcomed the demon with a silence he misread as surrender. He was thinking of lacquer and polished stair rails. He was thinking of the deep, dry sweetness of fresh timber. He was thinking of the way a palace roof would sound when it began to crack under heat, as if the building itself were shouting in surprise. The south wind delighted in these fantasies and whipped herself into a shrieking gale that rushed toward the city like a messenger of doom. The fire spirit followed, hotter, brighter, impatient now, as if hunger had become a clock ticking in his chest. He did not know that the shape of the land had changed. He did not know that the king and his laborers had left a quiet, glistening answer in his path. When the fire spirit reached the heart of the valley, he stepped forward, and the earth vanished beneath him. He plunged into the great pond with a roar that sounded like a furnace drowning. Water swallowed flame and exploded into steam. The night filled with a white, choking cloud that rolled out across the reeds. The demon thrashed and tried to climb the slick bank, his fire sputtering into frantic flashes. It was a humiliating sight for a creature who had played the invincible lord of catastrophe. The south wind circled above the chaos, her laughter turning nervous as she felt heat weaken beneath her. The fire spirit hauled himself out at last, dripping and furious, his glow dimmed to a ragged ember. He staggered forward anyway, too proud to retreat, too enraged to accept that humans might have learned how to wound him. He reached the outer districts of Seoul like a storm that had lost half its teeth. Houses caught fire, but not with the same ravenous speed. Roofs smoked and blackened, yet the flames struggled to leap. The south wind tried to revive the blaze, but the dampness clung to the demon's body like a curse and reduced her mischief to a weaker breath. When the fire spirit arrived at the palace compound, he managed to scorch part of the rebuilt structures, enough to remind the city that he still existed, enough to keep fear alive in the bones of witnesses. But he could not swallow the palace whole. His own wet fury betrayed him. The pond had taken something from him besides heat. It had taken certainty. At last he turned away, trailing smoke and rage, and limped back toward his mountain with the taste of defeat bitter on his tongue. Morning revealed a city split between grief and astonished relief. The palace had been struck, yet it was still standing, scarred rather than erased. People gathered at a distance to stare at the blackened wings of the compound, as if expecting them to crumble on their own from memory. The king walked the grounds with the tense calm of a man who had lived too long beside a danger that could not be negotiated with. He understood what the people felt. They wanted to celebrate the partial victory, yet feared provoking the spirit's return with too much joy. The king listened to his advisors, and when he learned exactly how the trap had worked, he summoned the well-digger and the engineers who had turned a desperate idea into a physical barrier. Their labor had been the kind of heroism that never earns songs unless a wise ruler insists on it. The king gave them rewards not for spectacle, but for the quiet intelligence of survival. And the story remembers this generosity because folklore loves a monarch who recognizes that the strength of a realm is measured by more than swords. But the king also knew that a wounded fire spirit could recover. A pond was a lesson, not a final chain. Water might blunt the demon's force, but it could not guarantee that he would not find another path, another season, another method of turning his appetite into calamity. The court returned to the deeper principles that had shaped Korean approaches to landscape and protection for centuries. The idea that the world possessed an inner order was not theoretical, it was practical. In the tradition of Pungsu, the Korean form of geomancy, related to broader East Asian ideas of reading the land, mountains and watercourses, carried energy that influenced human fortune. A palace was positioned for harmony. A city's defenses included walls, soldiers, and also symbols meant to align spiritual forces toward protection. In that worldview, a visible guardian could matter as much as a hidden trap. The king asked for a guardian that could not sleep and could not be bribed by comfort. He asked for something that would stand at the palace gate and announce to the fire spirit that Seoul had grown teeth of its own. The master stone carvers heard the request and understood the scale of it. Their craft was not merely decorative. In a world where myth and civic life overlapped, the carving of a guardian beast was a political and cosmological act. Stone could be given personality through belief. The sculptors gathered granite from the mountains as if harvesting a stubborn piece of the earth's will. The block was immense. The hauling of it across roads and fields required hundreds of hands and the coordinated patience of a community that had learned the price of unpreparedness. In the workshops, chisels rang for weeks. The craftsmen did not carve a gentle spirit. They carved a creature that looked born from the argument between terror and protection. The form that emerged resembled the legendary Haetai or Haechi, a beast known in Korean tradition as a guardian associated with justice and the power to repel disaster, especially fire. The exact shape of such a creature varied across depictions, but the essential impression was always the same. A lion-like body with a sturdiness that suggested endurance, scales or armor-like textures hinting at invulnerability, a face filled with severity rather than beauty, a mouth that implied appetite, but an appetite directed toward the destruction of destructive forces. The king's sculptors leaned into that symbolic logic. They gave the statue eyes that seemed to judge the world. They gave it fangs that could convince imagination that even a fire demon might be edible. When the great stone fire eater was finished, the palace grounds felt different. The statue anchored the entrance with a literal weight that seemed to press the air into new obedience. Soldiers patrolling near it felt both comforted and unsettled, as if this guardian belonged to an older and harsher law than their own training. The people came in daylight to look at it from a safe distance. Children hid behind their mothers' skirts, the way children do when they are torn between terror and fascination. The king permitted this public witnessing. He wanted the city to internalize the presence of a protector. A symbol cannot protect a community if the community does not believe in its role. The next dry night arrived quietly. The south wind returned to the mountain with her playful malice restored. She expected the fire spirit to roar with renewed confidence. Instead, she found him brooding, his pride bruised by the memory of drowning heat. Yet pride is a stubborn illness. The fire spirit had built his identity on the idea that humans were helpless before him. He told himself that the pond had been chance, a trick of water that would not stop him twice. He told himself that a city dared not humiliate him again. The south wind encouraged these thoughts, because wind loves the drama of friction and flame. Together they began their descent once more, with the demon's fire burning brighter as he neared the familiar city that had once fed him like a banquet table. The pond waited. He fell into it again, and this time his rage was so great that he forced himself out faster, shaking off water in violent sprays that hissed into vapor. He arrived at the palace approach, still sputtering but determined to finish what he had started. The south wind whipped around the roofs, searching for the place where flame could take hold. The fire spirit raised his arms and prepared to spill himself into the wooden heart of royal power. Then he saw the statue. It stood at the gate, as if it had been there longer than the palace itself. Moonlight cut clean lines along its jaws and horns and muscular posture. Its eyes seemed to catch the faint red glow of the demon's own fire and reflect it back with a cold disdain. The fire spirit slowed. The south wind faltered, her gusts thinning into uncertain breezes. The great stone fire eater did not move, because stone does not need movement to intimidate. It needed only presence, the immovable certainty of a creature that could not be bribed by fatigue or frightened by heat. The fire spirit approached a few more steps and felt a sensation he had not known in all his years of predation. He felt small. The statue's open mouth looked ready to swallow flame. Its fangs were angled in a way that suggested they were designed for something tougher than wood. The fire spirit imagined his own body caught between those jaws, his fiery essence crushed into darkness. Folklore thrives on this kind of reversal, where the predator meets a larger predator shaped from the fears of the community it once terrorized. The great stone fire eater was the city's imagination turned into granite. It was the accumulated will of the king, the laborers, the craftsmen, and every citizen who had watched their homes vanish into smoke. The south wind tried to laugh, but the sound came thin. The fire spirit hesitated long enough for doubt to deepen. Doubt is a form of cooling. He looked from the statue to the palace behind it. The palace was a feast, yes, But now the feast seemed guarded by something older and more ruthless than any soldier. The demon had never fought a symbol that had been carved for the specific purpose of frightening him. He had fought men, he had fought buildings, he had fought the ordinary materials of human life. This was different. This was a threat that belonged to the same mythic language as his own existence. He took a step back. The south wind circled him, urging him forward, but she too could sense the shift in the air. The statue radiated a silent warning that the night was no longer the demon's exclusive territory. For a heartbeat, the fire spirit seemed to weigh his pride against his survival. In heroic tales, a monster sometimes chooses combat and dies gloriously. In folklore shaped by practical fear, a monster often chooses retreat when faced with a protection it cannot understand. The fire spirit was prideful, but he was not foolish. He had learned from the pond that humans could lay traps in the land itself. What other traps might be hidden in the shadow of that stone beast? He retreated further. Then he turned. The south wind followed, annoyed and unsettled, her gusts fading as she was forced to abandon the spectacle she'd expected. The fire spirit ran back through the valley, his flames shrinking in the cold air of humiliation. He did not stop at the pond. He did not stop to snarl at the city. He fled to the mountain and disappeared into the crater with a rage that had nowhere to go. The night remained intact. The palace stood. The great stone fire eater kept its eternal watch. In the hours that followed, Seoul did what cities always do after surviving their own nightmares. It breathed out slowly, as if testing whether it was safe to relax. Guards remained alert. The king did not immediately declare absolute victory, because wise rulers know that certainty invites careless habits. Yet there was a new stability in the air. The people had seen the demon fail twice, and they had seen that the city now possessed multiple layers of defense: the practical barrier of water and the spiritual barrier of the guardian statue. The great stone fire eater became part of daily life. Merchants passed it on their way to supply palace kitchens. Courtiers bowed before it with a respectful nod. Children grew accustomed to its silhouette, and the fear it inspired shifted into a kind of pride. To be a citizen of a protected capital is to live under the shadow of symbols that remind you that your community has endured. Over time, such guardian figures became a recognizable part of the architectural language of Korean palaces and gates. The presence of fierce stone animals at entrances was never purely aesthetic. It was a statement of boundary, a line drawn between the ordered space of governance and the chaotic threats believed to lurk beyond. The story keeps its focus on the fire spirit, but it also quietly celebrates human adaptation. The king does not conquer the mountain. He does not attempt to extinguish the elemental force outright. Instead, he changes the relationship between city and landscape. He acknowledges that some dangers cannot be erased and chooses instead to build systems that channel and deter them. That is an ancient form of wisdom, echoed in many cultures where people learned to live beside forests that could burn, rivers that could flood, and mountains that could shake. At night, the statue looks most alive. Moonlight turns its granite into silver and shadow. In that light, it seems possible to imagine the fire spirit watching from the distant peak, simmering in grudging silence, unwilling to test the city again. The south wind returns to gentler games over rooftops. The pond remains in the valley, still and dark, patient as a second lesson waiting to be remembered. Seoul continues to rebuild its life around these protections. The palace lanterns are lit without the same tremor in the hand. The court ceremonies regain their rhythm. The king resumes the careful work of governance that does not make legends but keeps a realm intact. The people sleep more deeply. In the distance, the mountain remains part of the skyline, a reminder that the world is never fully tamed, only negotiated with. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the city is wrapped in cold mist and the palace roofs collect thin layers of frost, the great stone fire eater stands at the gate as if listening for the wrong kind of wind. In the beginning of this Mayan tale, the world is not yet the world people recognize. The sky exists, the earth exists, the forests and rivers exist, but the order of light has not settled into its familiar rhythm. There is a sense of unfinished architecture in the universe. The Popol Vuh speaks of ages and experiments of creation, of attempts to shape beings who could speak the names of the gods and carry gratitude in their breath. Before humanity finds its final form, before the sun and moon take their rightful places as steady lamps of time, the landscape of myth is full of openings where arrogance can climb in and pretend to be destiny. That is where Vukub Cakix appears. His name is often translated as Seven Macaw, and even the sound of that title suggests display and excess. A macaw is a creature built for spectacle, bright feathers, royal colors, a voice that carries across distance. In the logic of myth, such a bird can become a bridge between the ordinary and the supernatural because it already looks like something too vivid to be real. Vukub Cakix is not simply a magnificent bird. He is a being who believes magnificence grants authority. His feathers shimmer like a living mosaic. His eyes have a hard metallic gleam, and his teeth are described as jewels, as if his mouth were a treasure chest that opens whenever he chooses to smile. The story insists on this detail because his beauty is not incidental. It is the foundation of his delusion. He climbs to the top of a great tree and declares himself the sun and moon. In a world still waiting for true celestial order, the claim almost works. There are moments in early creation myths across many cultures where the universe is vulnerable to imposters. Someone speaks with confidence. Someone shines. Someone convinces the uncertain world that they are the missing piece. Vukub Cakix is that kind of pretender. He is a creature of wealth and radiance in a time when radiance is rare. He looks down on the early beings of the earth and speaks as though he is the axis around which their future should turn. His words are full of self-worship. He speaks of the brilliance of his eyes. He boasts of the glow of his teeth. He insists that all who look upon him should accept his light as the definitive light. The arrogance is almost intimate. He is not trying to build a kingdom in the human sense. He is trying to build a cosmos where his own reflection is the primary law. The Popol Vuh has a sharp instinct for the dangers of that kind of pride. It is a text that survived enormous historical pressure. The version known today was preserved by Quiché Maya, scribes in the colonial era, written in the Latin alphabet after the Spanish conquest, carrying older oral and ritual traditions into a new form that could endure in a hostile world. This means the story carries layers of time. It belongs to pre-Columbian cosmology and to the later experience of cultural survival. When the Popol Vuh condemns a false god who claims authority he has not earned, it resonates with more than one historical memory. That resonance does not change the myth's core events. It deepens the atmosphere around them. Vukub Cakix is the kind of figure myth loves to topple. He is powerful enough to threaten the cosmic plan, yet vain enough to make his downfall feel inevitable once the rightful forces arrive. His beauty is his armor, but it is also his weakness. A being who believes he is untouchable because he is dazzling will always underestimate the quiet intelligence of those who see past glitter. The rightful forces arrive in the form of the hero twins. Hunahpu and Ixbalanka do not start this episode as the sun and moon they will one day become. They are younger here, still moving through a world of trials and adversaries, still proving that cunning and courage can shape reality. The Popol Vuh frames them as culture heroes, figures who defeat arrogance and brutality through cleverly chosen tests. Their story is not a straight path of strength. It is a chain of strategic victories that restore balance one arrogant being at a time. They hear Vukub Cakix boasting. They understand immediately that this is more than a personal insult. A false sun disrupts creation itself. It misleads the early beings of the world. It places a selfish ego in the slot reserved for cosmic order. The twins decide that this bird must be humbled, not merely for revenge or reputation, but for the health of the world that is still being assembled. Their plan is precise. They do not charge at him with spears. They do not challenge him in the open, where his dazzling presence could intimidate witnesses into believing his lies. They choose the terrain of the hunt. They find a tree where he feeds. This detail matters. It places the conflict in a living ecosystem. The twins recognize that even a false god must obey hunger. The tree is laden with fruit. In some tellings, it is a nance tree, a detail that anchors the myth in the sensory world of Mesoamerica, where fruit, color, and seasonal abundance shape daily life. The Popol Vuh often weaves cosmic drama into the ordinary textures of food, family, and landscape, reminding listeners that the sacred story is never far from the acts of eating, planting, and moving through forests filled with birds whose feathers seem to echo the colors of imagined deities. Vukub Cakix arrives to feed. He perches high, confident and relaxed, because confidence is his default weather. The twins hide below with blowguns. The blowgun is not a random choice of weapon. It reflects real hunting technologies in the ancient Americas. A small tube of wood and a dart propelled by breath is a practical tool for bringing down birds without the noise of larger weapons. In myth, this technology becomes symbolic. The twins use breath itself to act against a being who falsely claims to embody the light of the sky. Their quiet weapon is a contrast to his loud vanity. Hunahpu aims. The dart strikes Vukub Cakix in the jaw. The moment is both comic and brutal in the way folklore often handles the downfall of the proud. A being who loved to show his glittering mouth is wounded precisely there. The blow cracks his radiant certainty. He shrieks and flails. He tumbles from the tree, not dead, but humiliated by the pain and the sudden proof that he has a vulnerable body beneath his shine. The twins rush forward. They believe the strike has done enough. This is where the myth takes a sharp turn, reminding the listener that arrogance is dangerous, but still dangerous. Vukub Cakix is wounded, yet he is still immensely powerful. He lashes out with furious strength and tears off Hunahpu's arm. The loss is not a minor injury. It is a symbolic wound in the hero's path. The Popol Vuh uses bodily harm to mark stages of transformation. The twins will ultimately become celestial bodies, but before that, they must endure the humiliations and dangers that test whether they are worthy of shaping the world. Vukub Cakix escapes with the arm. He flees to his home, clutching his grotesque trophy. The act is a statement of dominance. He wants the world to see that he can steal strength from those who challenge him. He wants to turn the twins' rebellion into a cautionary tale. His pride survives the injury. It even expands, fed by the belief that he has proven his superiority. The twins retreat. This is not defeat in the narrative sense. It is the pause that allows a more elaborate strategy to form. The Popol Vuh admires cleverness more than impulsive rage. The twins do not try to reclaim the arm by brute force. They recognize that Vukub Cakix's power is bound to his ornaments and his self-image. He is a being whose identity is externalized in jewels and shine. Remove the shine, and the false god collapses. They seek help from elders. The story brings in an old man and old woman who appear humble and harmless. These figures are sometimes interpreted as the twins' grandparents or as allied deities disguised in frail forms. The detail works on multiple levels. It suggests that wisdom and age can outmaneuver pride. It also reflects a social truth embedded in many indigenous traditions. Elders carry authority that is not loud. They carry lived knowledge and ritual understanding. In myth, that authority becomes a weapon sharper than any blade. The old couple approaches Vukub Cakix. They present themselves as healers. They speak the language of care, of remedy, of relief from pain. Vukub Cakix is suffering. His jaw throbs. His broken teeth, once the centerpiece of his boast, now mock him every time he tries to speak. Pain is the crack through which the trick enters. He invites them in. The old couple examine his mouth and his eyes. They claim they can restore his splendor. Vukub Cakix, desperate to regain his aesthetic authority, agrees to their treatment. The twins' plan now moves from the hunt to the con. The Popol Vuh delights in this shift. A false god who used spectacle to seize cosmic power will be undone by a quiet performance of empathy. The healers begin the procedure. They extract his teeth. In the mythic logic of the Popol Vuh, these teeth are more than biological. They are the emblem of his false identity. Removing them strips away the physical manifestation of his claim to radiance. The healers replace the jeweled teeth with humble substitutes, often described as simple white kernels of maize. Maize matters. Corn is the sacred heart of Mesoamerican life. It is food, economy, and cosmology. The Popol Vuh later describes humans as beings formed from maize dough, shaped by the gods into a final successful creation, capable of speech and gratitude. By replacing Vukub Cakix's false glitter with maize, the story performs a symbolic correction. The false sun is forced into the ordinary substance that will define true humanity. His jewels are exchanged for the humble matter of real life. They tend his eyes as well. The myth implies that his eyes had a shining quality that fed his boast. The healers remove that brilliance. In some interpretations, his eyes are replaced with something dull. Even if the exact materials vary across retellings, the narrative function is consistent. His ability to dazzle collapses. He can no longer look upon the world as a self-named celestial authority. Vukub Cakix grows weaker. His pride is tethered to his ornaments. When they vanish, his power drains away as if a lamp has been deprived of oil. The Popol Vuh treats this as a moral physics. The false brightness cannot survive contact with truth and humility. The twins recover Hunapu's arm. This retrieval restores their wholeness, and also signals that their plan has succeeded on every necessary level. The false god is stripped, the hero is restored, the cosmos inches closer to its rightful arrangement. Yet this is still the first act of a broader balancing. Vukub Cakix has sons. Zipacna and Caprican are embodiments of geological force and arrogant strength. Their stories follow the logic of the father's downfall. They too claim powers that unsettle the world. One boasts of raising mountains, another boasts of shaking them. In these figures, the Popol Vuh gives personality to the raw forces of the earth. This is a common sensation in myth. Mountains and earthquakes feel alive to the human mind because they are so vast and indifferent. Turning them into boastful giants makes them narratively manageable, allowing a culture to articulate awe and fear in the language of family conflict and moral correction. The twins will confront the sons later. For now, the focus remains on the false son who finally realizes he has been undone. There is a particular cruelty in the way his defeat occurs. He is not killed in a glorious duel. He is not struck down in front of an audience that can cheer his humiliation. He is dismantled quietly in his own home by figures who appear weak. The removal of his ornaments is almost surgical. It is not merely violence, it is subtraction. He becomes smaller with each lost jewel, with each replaced tooth. The myth suggests that shame itself is lethal when your identity is built on vanity. His death is the final confirmation that his light was never real. The world continues. The Popol Vuh is careful about this rhythm. A monster falls, and nature does not collapse. The false authority was a temporary distortion, not the foundation of reality. This gives the story its comforting architecture. It promises that arrogance can be removed without destroying the world, that true order is more resilient than the loud impostors who attempt to occupy its throne. The twins, still early in their long mythic path, move onward. They are not finished with the underworld lords. They are not finished with the trials that will shape them into the sun and moon the world is still waiting for. But the fall of Vukub Cakix is a major step. It clears a space in the sky and in the imagination. It removes the counterfeit brightness that could confuse the early beings of the earth. As evening settles in this chapter's world, the forests of the highlands breathe with a calmer rhythm. The great tree that once held the false sun stands silent. Its branches no longer bear the weight of a boaster who believed his feathers could replace destiny. Somewhere in the shadows, the twins prepare for the next confrontations that will test their intelligence and their endurance. The true lights of the world are still on their way. The path to them passes through pride, pain, and the patient logic of myth. The forest swallowed sound after the first clash, the way a great body swallows a knife and keeps breathing. Hunahpu and Ixbalanque moved through shadow and leaf, keeping pace with each other, not speaking much, because there are moments when speech only sharpens pain. Hunapu's missing arm was a raw absence that made the air feel colder around him. The wound was not simply physical. In a myth where bodies carry meaning, a lost limb is a torn page in destiny. The twins had struck the false sun with clever aim and bold timing, yet the price had been immediate and humiliating. Vukub Cakix had fled with the arm as a trophy, and that act was its own kind of grotesque proclamation. The bird demon wanted the world to witness that he could devour the challengers who dared question his radiance. He wanted the early beings of the earth to see that his glitter was still law. Somewhere beyond the broad trunks and the wet tangles of understory, he was already turning the stolen arm into an ornament of triumph. The twins did not need to imagine the scene to feel its weight. They knew the personality of their enemy. Pride, like his, is never content with private victory. It must be displayed. Vukub Cakix returned to his dwelling high in the trees with a wound in his jaw and fury in his chest. He told himself that the pain proved nothing. Pain was a nuisance. Pain could be treated. What mattered was the story he could now force upon the world. The great macaw-like lord hung Hunapu's arm in a place of honor, where any visitor would have to look up and recognize the reach of his violence. He displayed it as proof that he remained untouchable, proof that even the audacity of the famous twins could be broken and turned into decoration. Yet when the night deepened and he was alone with his injury, the arrogance cracked into something more fragile. He could feel his teeth loosened and shattered. He could feel the throb that traveled up into his skull. Every time he tried to speak his divine claims, his jaw reminded him that flesh and bone still existed beneath his jewels. The Popol Vuh understands something sharp about vanity. A being who builds identity on splendor will fear the loss of splendor more than death itself. Vukub Cakix wanted to be feared, but he wanted even more to be admired. As long as his mouth hurt and his teeth were broken, admiration would thin into ridicule. This possibility gnawed at him more than the wound. He needed someone who could restore the illusion. The twins understood that need. They withdrew into council with age and with the quiet forces that gathered around them like unseen allies. In this part of the myth, an old man and an old woman enter the story. Figures who wear humility, like camouflage. They appear as a frail couple, traveling healers whose lives have been shaped by hardship rather than glory. The details vary in emphasis across retellings, but the logic is consistent. The twins enlist the wisdom of elders, and the elders become the instrument through which arrogance is undone. This is not simply moral theatre. It echoes a cultural reality in which knowledge of ritual, medicine, and social balance often rests with those who have watched many seasons pass. A young hero may carry strength and daring. The elder carries timing, disguise, and the patience to let pride walk into its own trap. The plan the twins shape is as elegant as it is cruel. They do not seek to kill Vukub Cakix in open fight. A public duel would still assign him a dignity he does not deserve. They want to strip away the mechanics of his false authority. They want to remove the ornaments that allow him to convince himself and others that he is the sun and the moon. In this mythic economy, the jewels in his mouth and the hard brilliance of his eyes are not decorative. They are the scaffolding of his cosmological lie. Take them away, and the lie collapses into a powerless body that cannot bear the shame of its own exposure. The twins also understand that Vukub Cakix is susceptible to the language of care. He is wounded and proud and therefore primed to accept help that flatters his self-image. A false god who proclaims perfection is rarely prepared to admit vulnerability. When he does admit it, he will accept almost any promise that offers restoration. The old couple approached the great bird demon in daylight, and daylight mattered. Vukub Cakix thrived on being seen. His feathers were a banner of iridescence. His voice carried the authority of a creature who believed the world existed to hear him. The old man bowed low. The old woman kept her gaze gentle and respectful. They spoke like people who had traveled a long way and learned that deference can be a sharper survival tool than courage. They presented themselves as humble healers who had heard of the great Lord who shone above all others. They expressed sorrow that such a magnificent being might be suffering from pain. They offered remedies. They did not rush. They let the scent of their humility fill the space. The twins, disguised as their grandchildren or attendants, were present at the edges of this small performance, and their silence was part of the strategy. Vukub Cakix looked down at them with suspicion that softened into interest. He was used to fear, he was used to flattery. The old couple offered both in measured doses, and their calmness suggested confidence and skills that might be rare. When the old man mentioned teeth, Vukub Cakix flinched. That tiny reaction revealed the truth hidden beneath his boastful shell. The false son was in pain, and he was frightened that pain might become visible to the world. His jaw was the center of his display. The memory of the blowgun darts striking his mouth still burned like a hot coal. He wanted to believe he could heal himself through sheer importance, but the body does not always obey pride. The old woman spoke softly about how they had repaired the teeth of many great ones, kings, warriors, spirits of the forest. She said they had methods that could restore beauty and end discomfort. She offered these words with the careful cadence of someone who knows that vanity is hungry for reassurance. Vukub Cakix agreed to be treated. The myth often emphasizes how eagerly he accepts this offer, because the eagerness is a signal of his vulnerability. The old couple examined his mouth with the solemnity of surgeons. They murmured about infection. They spoke of the need for replacement. They said that the broken jewels must be removed so that the great Lord could shine without corruption. Vukub Cakix listened with the tense attention of a patient whose pride has already been compromised by suffering. When they explained that they would replace his teeth with something clean and strong and perfectly suitable for a being of his magnitude, he nodded. Then the old man began the work. The scene is both intimate and mythic. The false son lies still while humble hands remove the very symbols of his false greatness. One by one, the old couple extracted the pieces of turquoise, jade, and glittering substance that had defined his smile. Each removal drew a hiss of pain from the bird demon. Each removal also drew him closer to the edge of collapse. The twins watched with the cold patience of people who understand that moral order sometimes requires an act that feels like cruelty. The old woman placed new teeth into his mouth, and these teeth were not jewels. They were white kernels of maize. Corn is not a trivial substitution in this story. Maize is sacred in the world of the Maya. It is a staple of life, a foundation of agriculture and daily endurance. It is also a substance with cosmological weight. The Popol Vuh later describes the successful creation of humanity from maize dough, a narrative that frames corn as the material of true being. By replacing the false god's jeweled teeth with maize, the myth performs a symbolic correction. It drags a self-worshipping impostor away from glitter and places him into the common sacred substance that will define real humans. It is a quiet humiliation disguised as healing. Vukub Cakix does not recognize the insult immediately. He is consumed by the relief of pain lessening. He believes that any replacement must be an improvement if it is offered by those who appear to serve him. The old man then turned to the eyes. The eyes of Vukub Cakix had been part of his claim to radiance. The story describes them as bright with a hard, shimmering quality, as if the cosmos itself had embedded treasure inside his gaze. The healers spoke of clouds in his vision, of impurities, of the need to remove the old brilliance to restore a cleaner one. Their language was soothing and clinical. Vukub Cakix, still desperate to regain his full power of display, consented again. The removal of his eyes, whether described literally or symbolically, is a moment where the myth bares its teeth. A false authority is not gently corrected, it is dismantled. The old couple replaced the shining instruments of his vanity with something dull and humble, and as they did, the light inside him began to gutter. It is here that the story reveals its deeper logic. Vukub Cakix was never truly the Sunday. He had been a mirror that convinced itself it was a star. His power depended on belief, including his own. When his ornaments disappeared, his belief faltered. The world did not bow. The forest did not brighten for him. The early beings of the earth did not scramble to honor a creature whose smile no longer glittered. The false god felt the shift in the air. He looked at his reflection in water and saw a mouth no longer lined with treasure. He saw the pale kernels that belonged to meals and fields, not to cosmic sovereignty. The horror that rose in him was not fear of death. It was fear of ordinariness. A being who has proclaimed himself the center of creation cannot survive the sudden certainty that he is not even the brightest creature on a branch. His strength collapsed. The myth often suggests that shame itself was lethal. This is not poetic exaggeration. It is a moral statement expressed through narrative physics. Pride inflates a creature beyond its rightful scale. Truth deflates it. Vukub Cakix weakened, as if the removal of jewels had opened a hole through which his stolen authority leaked away. He tried to rise and command the world again, but his voice sounded different to his own ears. The old couple remained calm. The twins revealed their true identities. Hunahpu reclaimed his arm, restoring the wholeness that had been stolen. The false son could do nothing but watch the foundations of his identity crumble. He died there, not as a majestic villain, not as a cosmic rival with a glorious last stand. He died as an exposed pretender. His feathers remained beautiful, because nature can be lavish even when a spirit is morally bankrupt. But beauty could not save him now. The world had moved past his performance. The space he had occupied at the top of the great tree was empty again, waiting for the true lights that would one day rise. The twins did not linger in triumph. They were heroes shaped by motion. Each victory opened the next gate of responsibility. The Popol Vuh flows forward with the inevitability of a river finding its own descent. The fall of Vukub Cakix is a cleansing, but it is not the final cleansing. His sons remained, and their arrogance was a different flavor of threat. If the father represented false celestial authority, the sons represented the dangerous boast of geological power. Zipacna was the first. He was a giant who claimed to shape mountains, a creature of muscular pride who wanted the world to believe that every ridge and peak owed its existence to his hands. In a landscape where mountains are sacred and carry spiritual significance, such a claim is an assault on the divine architecture of the earth. The twins approached him with the same strategic intelligence they had used against his father. They offered him a task. They flattered him into believing he could accomplish feats beyond measure. When he bragged that he could lift a mountain, they guided him into a trap where the very weight he desired became the instrument of his downfall. The story describes him being crushed beneath a mountain or sealed under earth, a poetic resolution that binds his obsession to his end. Then came Cabrican. He was the shaker of mountains, a figure who embodied earthquakes and the terrifying sensation that the ground itself might decide to turn against the living. The twins lured him with a story of birds and sustenance. They offered him food that was tainted with their intention. When his strength faltered, they bound him and buried him in the earth, ensuring that his destructive boasting would no longer threaten the forming order of the world. These episodes echo the father's defeat while expanding the myth's scope. The twins were not merely correcting one arrogant creature. They were correcting a pattern of arrogance that could ripple through the cosmos if left unchallenged. The Popol Vuh places these victories within a larger arc. The twins are moving toward their confrontation with the lords of Xibalba, the underworld of the Quiché Maya imagination, a realm of tests, traps, and dark intelligence. The story does not treat the underworld as a vague hell. It is a structured domain governed by beings who embody disease, fear, and the cunning cruelty of mortality. The twins must descend there later, survive trials that include houses of blades, cold, jaguars, and darkness, and emerge with a kind of authority that only suffering can grant. The defeat of Vukub Cakix and his sons is a necessary preparation. A hero who cannot humble pride on earth will not survive the more sophisticated cruelty of the underworld. There is also an agricultural heartbeat beneath these cosmic dramas. The Maya world was shaped by seasonal cycles and by the relationship between humans and maize. The mythic insistence on corn as sacred substance reflects how deeply dependent communities were on the success of planting and harvest. A story that elevates maize to a material of creation is more than spiritual poetry. It is cultural memory of survival. When the Popol Vuh claims that humans were ultimately formed from maize, it honors the crop that kept families alive through drought, war, and uncertainty. It binds identity to the land in a way that outlasts political shifts. In that light, the replacement of Vukub Cakix's jewels with maize teeth becomes a sharp and elegant correction. He wanted to be the Sunday. He was forced into the substance that feeds those who live under the Sunday. The forest after these events feels calmer, though calm in myth is always temporary. Birdsong returns to ordinary patterns. The great trees stand without the burden of a false light perched in arrogant display. The twins walk in the dawn air with their restored wholeness, their confidence strengthened by victories that were earned through risk and intelligence rather than simple force. They are still young, still moving toward the culminating trials that will define them as the true luminaries of the sky. But their path is clearer now. The world has been cleansed of one major distortion. The early beings of the earth can look upward without being tricked by a glittering impostor. The story carries an implicit lesson that reaches beyond this particular episode. Power that depends on display alone is fragile. Authority that declares itself without consent from deeper order will eventually encounter the quiet knives of truth. The Popol Vuh is a mythic text that wants the listener to understand that creation is not only an act of making, it is an act of maintaining balance. When something rises too high without rightful foundation, the heroes who serve balance will come. Night falls again in the highlands. A soft wind moves through leaves. The kind of darkness that once belonged to Vukub Cakix's boast now belongs to ordinary time. Somewhere in the distance, fields that will one day be planted with maize wait for human hands that have not yet been fully shaped into their final form. The twins, knowing that their greatest trials still lie ahead, pause beside a stream whose surface reflects a sky that is still incomplete. They do not announce what they will become. They simply continue.